Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with the patch 4.4a rundown. And Wild Rift has pulled a fast one on us again. This seems to be happening more and more often, in which that they basically released the patch live without saying anything, and they only released the patch notes like 8 hours later or something like that. This is happening more and more often. So you have like randomly like the game patches, and then you go into the game, you see that, wait a minute, like how I realized was I saw Runan's got nerfed. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, basically the patch went live, but the patch notes are like 8 hours behind, which is really not a good look, because normally the patch notes either has to come out at the same time, come out before the patch is live, or even come out as a first look on Twitter, which they used to do. But either way, having the patch notes out after the patch really doesn't make sense, because if not, how are you going to know what the changes are when the patch is already live? But anyways, enough about the rant. Let's just jump into what the actual changes are. So first thing is, Arena is going to be coming out on 10th of November. Now, as of the time of recording of this video, this is going to be in like less than 2 hours. So by the time the video releases, it's probably going to be live already. So champion changes, they have actually changed ratios for a lot of champions. I'm gonna, of course, just get into it one by one. So first up, we have Corki. So Corki, his AD is going up by 2 in terms of his starting AD, and his AD scaling is going up by 0.4. So just a little bit more AD for Corki. But the main change is on his ulti, basically his AD ratio is going up by pretty much 10, not 10%, but it's going up by a scaling amount. So it's like nothing, then 5, then 10%, and for the big one again is nothing, 10%, then 20%. So basically, if you guys notice, the base numbers are still the same and the AP numbers are still the same. So my main theory about why they gave him this buff is probably they want Corki to build more AD and less AP, because now one of the most popular Corki items is going to be Riftmaker, and with Crown is also really popular, so a lot of people can go for Crown and Riftmaker. And I think that they want Corki to build more AD, so they're increasing his AD scaling to make that more attractive. Now, I haven't actually played Corki since patch 4.4, but I'll definitely be playing Corki soon enough and making a video on it, of course, or some videos for different builds. But anyways, let's jump into Fiora. So Fiora, honestly, I haven't really seen Fiora being played all that much in like patch 4.4, or maybe even at all. But basically, what's going on here is, when she procs her passive, it's going to do 3.5% max health damage instead of 3%, and when you trigger all 4 vials on your ultimate, the bonus damage you're going to do is, instead of 12%, is 14%. So this is a pretty huge buff to Fiora, and because you have to remember that vials pretty much just spawn, unlimitedly. So like buffing it by 0.5% is actually pretty huge. So this looks like Fiora is going to be a lot stronger, and definitely, basically, this mainly benefits the Fiora players who are already good, like the Fiora mains. It doesn't really benefit like any new Fiora players, because really, like, it's not that easy to hit vitals if you don't play Fiora. So for new Fiora players, this real change is not going to matter all that much, but for like those experienced Fiora mains, this is going to be a pretty huge buff. Speaking of buff, Yasuo is wind wall is becoming a flat 18 seconds at all ranks, instead of going from 21 down to 18. So this is a pretty huge buff for Yasuo, of course, because you max Q, E, and then W last. So you're going to be stuck at a 21-second cooldown for majority of the game. So with the cooldown becoming consistent at 18 seconds, it's really quite a obvious buff to Yasuo. But of course, you're not really touching his damage or anything like that, so it's just like his utility. Probably because mages are really rampant, so his wind wall is going to help you block some spells. So overall, it's quite nice for Yasuo and his team, but it's not too big. Now, what is pretty big though is Aatrox's buff. So Aatrox, firstly, his passive from 5 to 12% is going to 5 to 15% max health damage, which means he's going to do more damage in the late game. And his Q, which is his main form of damage, his base damage is actually going up at the later ranks, so it's going up by 5, 10, and 15, and then his AD ratio is going up by 5% at all ranks. Now this is really strange, because I felt that Aatrox was in an okay spot in the meta at the moment, and he's actually a little bit on the strong side as well, but now they're giving him a bunch of buffs. I think he's going to be really strong in the Baron lane, and definitely going to see a lot more of him in your matches. Okay, so on the flip side, we have Warwick. Now, Warwick is a pretty weak champion, but just based on the nature of his kit, and he never really found his footing in Wild Rift. Like, Warwick has never been strong. They're buffing two aspects of him. Firstly, his Q is doing 1% more max health damage, which really doesn't matter all that much, although it is his main point of damage, so I guess you could say it does. But in my opinion, Warwick is so weak that if you're picking Warwick, you're already in trouble. And his ulti cooldown is going down by 5 seconds at all ranks, so you can of course get off that ulti a lot more often, so that is useful. And here is probably the biggest nerf of the patch, is Twitch. So basically, Twitch has been benefiting from the new Runans, which is also getting nerfed, by the way. And I think that most of the nerfs is because of Twitch. The reason like Runans is nerfed is because of Twitch. And and basically he has been destroying people in the jungle. So they're nerfing him really, really hard this time. This is not the first time Twitch jungle was nerfed, by the way. They already nerfed his E damage on jungle monsters, and I think it's his poison damage on jungle monsters or something like that. They nerfed his damage to jungle monsters before, and now they're doing it again. So what's the change here? So first up, his passive is gonna scale off. It scales off of AP, so the AP ratio is going down from 3.5 to 2.5, so 1% less AP here. His E, the Contaminate, which is his main point of damage aside from his auto attacks, the poison is still the same damage. The AD ratio is going down by 4%, but the AP ratio is going down by 10%. So once again hitting the AP ratio, and the damage to monsters is going down by 50% from 130 to 80. And finally, his ulti ballistic speed, which is basically how fast your bullet flies from you to your enemy, is going up by from 4k to 6k, which is like by 150%. So basically, let's evaluate what's happened here. Basically, this is a pretty direct message from Riot. They don't want AP Twitch jungle. Now, Twitch jungle obviously takes first strike. He builds AP. I was planning to make a video on it, but I don't know if that's still gonna happen because it looks like it's a pretty huge nerf. So we'll have to see if he's still viable. But basically, you take of course your first strike. You go to the jungle. You build AP. So you think about it like Nashor's Runans, or like I seen Twitchers go Runans first item. So the reason why this is so strong is because Runans as an AP item is really good because it gives 60 AP from the very beginning. Unlike AD, it gives like 30, or it gave 30 AD and gave 60 AP in patch 4.4. So it's basically the same as Nash's too. So Twitch could actually start Runans as your first item, which is pretty bonkers, and basically allow him to spread the poison easily, allow him to kill people really quickly, and basically he just bursts people way too much. So they're hitting his AP ratios in terms of his poison damage, in terms of his E damage, and just his jungle clear in general. So they really want to push Twitch to ADC, which is obviously why they are buffing his attack speed for the ulti. Personally, I don't think Twitch ADC is gonna be very strong, because Twitch, like in terms of his build now, is kind of complicated. Like you're probably gonna have to go Bloodthirster into Runans, because you really need Runans to spread your poison, and like Runans had just gotten nerfed again, and it gives you like 15 AD now, which is horrible, but we'll get to that later. So next up we have Yuumi. So Yuumi, what's going on here is basically, once again, it's a ratio change. So it's from 25 to 20 AP on your Q, and then from 35 to 30 on the empowered Q. And for your ulti, is basically going to be 20% to 15% in terms of your ratio change. Once again, it's hitting all ratios, no base numbers. Now, honestly, I think these changes don't matter whatsoever, because the part that makes Yuumi problematic is two things. Firstly is the amount she heals on her E. Secondly is the kind of AD/AP boost she gives on her W. Like, really, no one cares about Yuumi's Q damage and her ult damage. Her Q is more so to slow than to do damage, and unless you're building like the Luden's build. And her ult is, once again, more so for the root and slow than really the damage. So really, the damage on these two abilities don't matter. So in my opinion, there's no real change here. So Shyvana is getting a buff to her W ability, so it's getting a small buff in terms of base damage by 5, and in terms of ratio also 5%. And then for the empowered version, which is, or is it the empowered version? No, this is damage per second, total damage. Okay, so basically this change just translates to this change. So essentially these two changes are equivalent. So this is the total amount of damage you can end up doing if with these changes. So basically just a slight buff to her W. This is gonna increase her clear speed, firstly, which is already pretty fast, and of course her damage to champions gonna increase by a bit as well. And her ulti, she's getting a little bit more health on her ulti at all ranks. But really, I don't think these changes are going to be too big for Shyvana. It's not too big of a changes. The health doesn't really matter that much, and the damage here is good, which of course, again, a little bit more damage to enemies and clearing faster is always good, but it's not too big of a change that I think anything is really going to be affected. But who's going to be affected is Janna. So Janna, her bonus movement speed on her W is going down by 5% at all ranks, so a lot less movement speed, and her shield, which is her E, the base numbers are actually the same once again, but the AP ratio is going down from 60 to 45. Now, I did think that Janna was pretty strong, but I didn't really think it was because of her E and her W. I really thought it's because of how spammable her Q is. Like, the tornado, she has 2 charges of it, and she just spams it nonstop. Like, I think 2 charges is fine, but I think the cooldown needs to be increased a little bit. But because, like when you lane against a Janna, every other second you're just dodging one of her tornadoes. It's ridiculous. So like you can't even farm in peace because you're just trying to dodge those pot shots that the Janna's taking at you, which is pretty annoying to play against. But anyways, at least she got nerfed, so I guess it's a step in the correct direction, and definitely these nerfs will be a little bit more impactful than what I suggested, because hitting her shield is pretty huge, and movement speed is a lot of utility loss as well. So Brand's getting a little bit more health, and once again he's getting a ratio buff. So his E is going from 40 to 50% AP, and his ult's going from 25 to 30 AP. Honestly, the ratios, 10% ratio on E and 5% ratio on ult is pretty big. Of course, because of course mages scale very well, and I still don't think this is gonna make Brand a good champion, but it's definitely good for people who play Brand because he's gonna do that much more damage. Vi getting 4 more armor, her kill is going to be a bit healthier, and her cooldown on her ult is going down by 10, then 10 seconds, then 5 seconds, then nothing. So basically it's an early game buff, which is definitely going to help Vi, because obviously Vi is a ganking jungler, and you always want your ult to be up when you gank. Not always, but it'll be good if your ult is up. So basically this is going to let Vi have better ganks more often, which is always going to be a good thing for her. So it's pretty nice buff to her. Now Echo, getting a small base damage increase in terms of his Q. So remember that this is 10 extra AP on both, so it's a total of 20 if you hit both, and the ratios are actually remaining the same. So basically small base damage increase. Yeah. So his ulti cooldown is actually going down by like 10 seconds. They're getting the Vi treatment, basically 10, then 5, then nothing. So I think this is going to benefit Echo Jungle a lot more, because this means that his clear is going to be a lot faster with 20 extra base damage on his Q, which jungle monsters of course are not going to dodge. Whereas in mid, you generally can only hit one part, because the other part generally going to be dodged by your opponent. Of course, unless you E on top of them. But basically I think that this is gonna buff Echo Jungle a lot more. I think Echo is actually better in the jungle than mid at the moment, so there's that. So now item changes. So we have a couple. So we have 3. So first up is Crown. Now obviously we all know Crown is completely busted. So what changes did they make for it? So firstly, it's build path. Instead of having Hextech Alternator, now you have to build Fiendish Codex and Ring of Revelation. Now this is actually a really huge nerf to build, because Hextech Alternator is actually a really strong item, and having to change it to a Fiendish Codex and the Ring of Revelation kind of sucks. So you're gonna be a lot weaker when you're building towards Crown. But the Crown itself, what's changed? So first up, 10 AP nerf, that's reasonable. Ability haste going from 10 to 20, which is actually a buff, and the health is getting removed in exchange for basically the more ability haste. Now I actually think that this is a buff, because getting more ability haste on mages is always going to be a good thing, and getting this less health, it does reduce your tankiness or your survivability, but it also prevents you from getting propped on by Giant Slayer, because of like Crown and other items like give health. Actually mages are getting propped on by Giant Slayer a lot, so this is actually kind of an indirect buff, but of course it's mainly a nerf because you lack survivability. And here are the 2 big changes. So firstly, the duration of reducing your incoming damage is going from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. So you're gonna have to be a lot more precise when you're, getting your crown proc and seeing how much damage you can take. You can't just stand there and just take damage for a long duration, because cutting off like half a second is like 1/3 of the time. So to 1 second, this is a pretty huge nerf. And also how much you can reduce the cooldown by is going from 4 seconds to 5 seconds. So that means every time you hit an AP spell, instead of going down by 5 seconds, go down by 4 seconds. I think this is all right of a change. I think this is really the big change. The stats and you know, the cooldown one, it's okay changes, but this is really the huge nerf. I think that Crown is still gonna fulfill the role that it's meant to fulfill. I still think it's gonna be a strong item. The Banshee's effect is still there, and reducing damage by 1 second is still pretty huge. The 70% didn't get changed, so I still think Crown is gonna be a strong item, but it's gonna be a lot more balanced now for sure. And Magi's has been letting mages snowball out of control. Like for those mages who go for the high risk play of going Magi's first item, and they end up you know, scaling very well, it just goes insane. Like I played against a Vladimir who started Magi's first item, and he full stacked his Magi's by the time he got to his like first full item, which I think was like Cosmic Drive or something. And like the amount of damage he was doing with full stack Magi's was insane. And obviously that's supposed to be the case because it's a high risk, high reward item, but they're increasing the risk and lowering the reward. So it's gonna be that so much riskier because it's 300 more gold now. You lose out on 30 max health, and your ability power is going down from 30 to 25. So you lose out a bit of AP, you lose out a little bit of health, you have to pay more for it. So it's basically the same item, but it's you know, higher risk, lower reward. I say lower reward, but the stacks still give you the same amount. It's really just the base stats that got affected. So basically it's just higher risk. The reward is roughly the same. And lastly, as I alluded to, here's the Runan's changes. So Runan's AD is going down from 30 to 15, and AP is going down from 60 to 30. Now, I get why they made these changes, but I think that these changes really are meant to target people like Twitch in particular, because I know some ADCs like to start Runan's. Like, I think champions like Ashe or like Zeri might start Runan's like literally first item. But really, 30 AD kind of sucks for a first item. It's so low. Like 30 AD is horrible. 15 AD is like basically non-existent. This gives you less AD than your boots. Your boots gives you like 30 to 35 AD, which is like Runan's gives you no AD essentially. So that's horrible. And 60 AP to 30 AP, like as I said, I get why they made these changes. It's really mainly for Twitch, because Twitch can start off with a Runan's Hurricane and get 60 AP, which is a lot for like, you know, one item. But I know why they made the change from 60 to 30, which does make sense. But if they make this change from 60 to 30, they have to change the AD as well from 30 to 15, because you can't give the same amount of AD and AP on the same item, because it wouldn't be fair. Because the main reason why the AD is normally half of the AP is because AD scales, you know, a lot better, in the sense that if you give someone more AD and they have a lot of attack speed like ADCs, they can make use of the AD a lot more often, whereas mages need to wait for their spell cooldowns, which is why you always get a lot more AP than than AD, which is why like Death Cap gives you like 100 plus AP, whereas like your strongest like AD item like Bloodthirster and IE gives you only 55 AD. So this kind of makes sense in a balance perspective, but really the main reason why the AD had to be lowered is because of the AP, and like the AD being lowered kind of sucks because this is predominantly an ADC item still, because don't forget that your Runan's bolts scales off of your AD. So if you build Runan's as an AP user like Twitch, your Runan's bolts are going to be doing less damage because you're not building, of course, you're not building AD. So overall, I think it's a pretty sad nerf for Runan's, but in terms of the rest, basically Heartsteel skins are going to be coming out soon, and that's pretty much it for the patch. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.